Formal good evening, everyone. I'm too near the speakers, Dave. Is that the problem? A little bit ringy. To this side? Okay. In the room over there? Maybe I'll go behind. How about that? That might be a bit easier. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to St. Stephen's Church. My name's Ian. I'm one of the clergy here, and it's just a great pleasure to welcome you to the centre of Norwich and St. Stephen's this evening. Also welcome to people who are on Zoom online as well. If I can just waste the people online's time just for a moment, just to give you a couple of housekeeping notices. If you haven't found them already, ladies and gents are behind the reredos. So if you just go to the left, turn right, keep on walking, you will see the toilets that way. It goes without saying that if we have a fire, we need to exit the building. And guess where the exit is? Yes, absolutely, the door that you came in. So, but hopefully none of that will happen. St. Stephen's is a very live and active church. We have a very active eco group, of which you will hear from Peter, one of our members, a little bit later on. We're very proud of our bronze A Rocha award, and we are working towards a silver award. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that we've been doing as a church, for those of you that don't know, we have a cafe here. We have been reviewing all of our cleaning materials and moved those to more eco-friendly solutions. And we also had a very interesting conversation in our toilets as to whether we should have paper towels or whether we should have electric blower fans. And Peter and the group advised us, and you will see the electric blower fans, which was the answer to that. We are also, is this a Christian thing to say? We are deeply jealous of our friends and neighbours, Peter Mancroft, just across the road, who are having their solar panels installed. We would love some too, but it's a little bit more difficult planning for our building in terms of Peter Mancroft, but that's certainly the way forward in terms of the future. So that's enough of me, that's enough of St. Stephen's. I've just been asked to open in prayer, so shall we pray? God of creation and Lord of life, you have entrusted us to care for our planet and our environment. And we recognise that in many ways we have failed. Lord, we're sorry. Make us people who recognise, nurture and act towards a more sustainable world for the benefit of all who draw life from this planet. We think of and we pray for our Bishop Graham as he leads the Church of England in environmental matters. Help us to raise up more campaigners who will speak out for wisdom, restraint and compassion. Teach us to partner you in protecting your precious world and to sustain the lives of even the most vulnerable of our global neighbours. And help us here in Norfolk to protect and appreciate the wonder of our locality. Help us to be good stewards of each flower, each insect, and wonder at the interconnectedness of your creation. And so be with us as we meet to discuss and plan this evening. Amen. Thank you. And over to you, Chair.
Ian, thank you very much. Dave, it sounds okay, so we are ready to proceed. Welcome again. First of all, I cannot thank St. Stephen's, Madeline, Ian, the PCC and the entire team for allowing us to meet this evening. My name is David Long. I chair the Environmental Working Group in the diocese. So just before I introduce our wonderful panelists here this evening, just a little bit background about why we have these Eco Church Forums or Eco Forums. This is our 7th Eco Church Forum, and it's our first in person. In fact, the Environmental Working Group has only had one meeting in person since it first met in 2019. And there's an interesting argument and debate there about how much carbon we saved in doing that. The role of these forums has been to go through the A Rocha based Eco-Church Forum survey and look at each of the categories. And tonight, this forum is specifically focusing on food choices within the lifestyle section of that survey. In setting up this forum, we are extremely aware and sensitive to the complexity of a global food system that ensures that most of those with the least resources in the UK resort to the cheaper, ultra-processed food. Recent research by Future Health highlighted Norfolk as extremely surprising in some senses, perhaps, as having higher than average rates of malnutrition, mostly in our elderly population, but also in some children. And we also believe that there is a perception and a reality that LOAF, local, organic, animal-friendly, fair trade principles, which you will find highlighted in the A Rocha Eco-Church survey, are difficult to achieve for many in the lower income communities and for those churches who provide food for their local communities. So that's kind of the background. You'll see me occasionally flicking to my phone. That's not because I'm checking my WhatsApp messages. That's because I got up very early this morning, couldn't find my watch, and I needed to keep us to time. But I'm delighted to introduce the panel here. So firstly, to my left, Peter Emmerich, John Innes Foundation Fellow at the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, specialist in the grass pea, the Lythyrus sativus. Got it. I had to practice that earlier. And also specializing in agricultural sustainability, particularly in developing countries. Peter's wife, Hannah, is one of the foundation members of the Eco-Church team, along with Barbara and Gemma. Peter, it's absolutely delightful that you have been able to join us this evening. And then to my right, Anna Sweeting is a research fellow for the Norwich Institute of Healthy Aging, based in a medical school at the University of East Anglia. She undertakes research around eating behaviours and food poverty. She is passionate about ensuring we hear seldom heard, got it right, we hear seldom heard voices and finding accessible and creative ways of engaging. Hannah, it's really a delight. Anna, it's really a delight to have you with us here this evening. And then finally, we thought we should split vicars up. So Leon Collier, the son of an arable farmer who you wonderfully say you were found by Jesus and became a full-time vicar. You left Suffolk for a while and has now returned and moving back to the farm, and you were sowing this morning.
Oh, getting ready for maize.
Getting ready for maize this morning. So these are our panels. They are going to speak, Peter starting first, then Anna, and then Leon for about 4 minutes, and then we will open it up to questions. Peter.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the introduction. I work on global food systems, and that is a very broad and large term. And so we can only think about a very small aspect of what food systems mean for the world tonight. And what I wanted to look at a little bit is the climate impact of the food that we produce and that we eat. Because food systems have an absolutely massive impact on global heating, producing about 1/3 of global emissions. So we have to absolutely get those emissions down if we want to have any hope of addressing the climate crisis. The most important decisions on this are not made at the levels of consumers. They're made by governments, they're made by industry bodies. But even the decisions that we do get to make in the supermarket when we decide on what to buy can be very difficult because there's so much conflicting information floating around. So I find it's very helpful to have just a few rules of thumb that are backed by really good evidence to help with making those decisions. And what I wanted to put forward here is that from a climate and from an emissions perspective, really what you eat is far more important than where that comes from or even how it is produced. If we can look at our first slide here. This is a study that composes about 500 scientific studies made by different researchers all around the world. And it incorporates data from about 40,000 farms in 119 countries. So this is really the largest picture of what different foods do to our climate. And all the bars at the top, all of those are the animal-based foods. You can see beef at the very top. You can see lamb and mutton. You can see beef again, this time from dairy herds. And all the ones at the bottom are the plant-based foods. And you can see from this just how stark that difference is and how really surprisingly clear the division between the animal-based foods and the plant-based foods is when it comes to the impact on global heating. This takes into account the production, so the methane that cows burp out, the land use change. So when forest is cut down to make place for pastures, it takes into account the energy that it takes to produce fertilizer to produce our crops, and all these different kinds of emissions. And this gives a really, really stark picture and a very clear idea of what I think a rule that we should apply is that we really need to reduce the amount of animal-based foods in our food systems. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone needs to turn vegan. It means we all have to reduce the amount of animal-based foods in the system. Another thing that comes up here, which is very surprising, is how tiny the emissions of the transport system in this are. In the red, you can see at the top, transport. But most of the bars, you can barely see the tiny sliver of transport in the emissions of all of this. And that is because the way that most of this stuff gets shipped around the world is by sea in very large container ships. And those ships can emit a lot of carbon, they use a lot of fuel, but they also carry so much stuff that actually the emissions of the transport system within that are tiny compared to production. So we don't have to worry nearly as much as we do about food miles, and we should worry a lot more about the emissions from production. A vanishing percentage of our food, 0.2%, gets transported by air. So while transporting by air has a lot of emissions, it's very, very little of our food that gets moved that way. In fact, your drive to a supermarket to buy food for you a week, that might emit more carbon than was emitted in transporting all of that food from all around the world to the supermarket. Emissions vary a lot from one farm to another, but for a consumer, that's extremely difficult to assess. You usually have nothing to go by to make that assessment between two different packs of beans, for example. If anything, you have the claim from the company that produces the food that is trying to sell it to you that have put that on the packaging. So that is a very difficult assessment to make, whereas the assessment of whether you're buying cheese or tofu or buying beef or beans, that is a very, very clear decision that anyone can has the information to make. The one thing that will be on the packaging is whether it is organic or not. And organic systems do generally produce less emissions per unit area. So two farms of the same size, the organic farm will produce less emissions, most likely. However, it also produces less food. And that difference in yield is very important because it brings out, it can make the overall emission come out as a wash. If we can go to the next slide here. This is a bit difficult to see, but each of these bars is a pair between conventional and organic. And almost all of those, the differences between them are very small. This is data for England and Wales, and trying to make a calculation of what would happen to overall emission if all of English and Welsh agriculture shifted towards organic systems. Overall, these emission differences are very, very small, and they're nothing compared to the emissions differences between animal and plant-based foods. So purely from the emissions point of view, from the greenhouse gases that come out of this, organic is not a good guideline. This doesn't take into account a lot of the other impacts that agriculture has on local environments, on stuff that flows off from the farm into rivers, and that's an entirely separate discussion. But just from an emissions point of view, organic is not a good guideline. So as a rule of thumb, really eating food that is produced by plants is a lot better than eating food that's produced by animals. I'm going to go to the last slide. A bonus point here is that overall, this is true in the global picture, but is also true in countries like the UK. It is cheaper to meet your dietary needs with plant-based foods than it is with animal-based foods. And in the UK, even the average diet that is very, very high in meat is more expensive to meet nutritional demands than plant-based foods. This is very bird's eye, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more in detail about this from Anna. But this is a useful thing to point out. There's a lot of research going on now to try to understand how different countries can adapt their local diets to be more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. But this is something that we all have to do, and that every country has to come up with their own solutions for. And just a final point that I want to make is that for churches, there's a benefit in having in offering plant-based foods for communal meals, in that it just happens to meet quite a lot of different kinds of dietary restrictions. It meets the restrictions for vegetarians and vegans, but those foods also are generally acceptable to people following a kosher or halal diet. So it's a really wonderful way of welcoming a really broad group of different people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. In my research around healthy eating and eating behavior, it's very much focused on health, but much of what I come across is also transferable to thinking about the sustainability and environmental conversation around food. I'm acutely aware, working in a team of nutritionists and health professionals, of just how beneficial a healthy diet is for people. Health inequalities are increasing, and there is a shocking 19-year difference in healthy life expectancy between our richest and our poorest communities. And I was saddened to see last week that both Norwich and Norfolk were in the top 17 local authorities that had seen significant increases in the inequality around expectancy. So this is not okay, and we need to address this, and diet is a key part of that. But I am also aware, having done a lot of research across Norfolk, of just how sensitive the conversation is around eating behaviours. And for many, there is no choice. And so we have to be very careful with how we speak. I think the conversation is really important, and we need to be having the conversation, but with that awareness and understanding of people's circumstances. And I just reflected on 4 kind of key points that I'm aware of with my work. That I think are transferable. Firstly is around affordability. The hunger that I'm seeing certainly is shocking, and many families and people are needing to just fill a tummy. And if that means that you go for the 99p hot dog in Great Yarmouth Market, then that's what you'll do, because then your children are fed. And so, as somebody quite recently said, when I was doing a questionnaire, we often have different questionnaires around specific kind of diets or eating behaviours. They said to me, Anna, please stop asking me what I've eaten and ask me, have I eaten? And that was so profound for me and has really changed the way I approach things. Secondly is locality. We talk and use the language of local food and see this as a really positive thing, of which for many it is a positive thing. But what's local to some communities is very different to others. So for example, the Golden Triangle, you might have the lovely greengrocer shop nearby. But for the communities I work with in Larkman Estate, what local food is for them is actually a fish and chip shop. It is the really expensive spa shops, and it is all the fast food. So actually shopping locally for them isn't a positive thing. So we need to think about our language. Thirdly is culture. And I think we have an understanding and awareness of different countries and the cultural kind of changes and norms around the patterns of eating. But what has come to me as a bit of a surprise is understanding the culture around deprivation. And I have kind of spoken around healthy foods to communities, and they'll say to me, that's not our food, that's the rich kids' foods, or that's their food. And I'm talking about Dereham Road. You know, that's what they eat over there when you talk about things like lentils or vegetables. That's not what I eat. But that what I eat is really important to me. So we need to come at it from that understanding. And then just finally, another thing I'm coming across is what we're calling kind of the perma crisis, that people are in constant crisis at the moment and are totally overwhelmed with life, whether they need to choose between heating their house or eating, whether they are unsure whether they've even got a home tomorrow. So when I then come saying, have you thought about eating more vegetables? It's obviously the priority is just so far down there. In Thetford, for example, when I recently went 2 weeks ago and I was talking about healthy eating and looking at how much of a priority it was, I was told, well, the number of people living in the forest at the moment is increasing substantially. So they haven't got resources to cook. They haven't got the resources to buy the food. So me coming in saying these things, I need to do really sensitively. That said, there is absolutely a place for the conversation to be had, whether that be around healthy eating or sustainability. And I'm totally for ensuring that people do have access to healthy food and it has as little impact on the environment as possible. I just think we need to kind of do it in such a way that shows our love, understanding, and bring people with us to co-develop and have these conversations.
Anna, thank you so much. So important to bring out these complexities. Remember that we are in a church and our gospel imperatives as well. Leo.
Well, let's bring it down to, well, I'm going to say North Suffolk, but let's say Norfolk. As a farmer and as a grower, the food that we eat, yes, of course, can be global, and as we go into a supermarket, it comes from all over the place. But we are surrounded by fields. In Norfolk, the fields are predominantly cereals, with some livestock, quite a few hidden, I suppose you could say, hidden pigs and chickens and that kind of thing. We don't often see those, but most of the cereals which are grown around us, and that would be the predominant harvest around, is then being fed to those pigs and those chickens. That's the sort of reality of kind of the food offering. And that, from my sense, is a little bit sad. It's very industrialized. It is very globalized. We have decided, or it has been decided over the last century or so, that actually a place like Norfolk, a place like Suffolk, East Anglia, has become a grain place. And the economics of that, and I suppose some sense the environment, the land, the flatness, and the weather is conducive to that. But it's meant that actually the local food that is produced isn't necessarily food that you could go up to a farm and, I'm hungry, can you feed me? That's just a very rare kind of opportunity that a farm could actually fulfill. Having said that, there are more mixed farms, and there are farms that have retained the ability to produce actual food that people can actually eat. Now, I think I want to argue that model, albeit quite complicated and complex, and in some sense quite romantic, but the idea that a farm produces food for a local community, or even a regional community, it sounds idealistic in our kind of modern world, but actually it shouldn't be. Well, I've moved back to the family farm, and I've got a sense of burden of actually, is this farm going to be passed on to next generation or next generation of growers? And there's lots of questions within that. One is what we are growing, is it degrading the soil and degrading the kind of the environment that we're in, all of the chemicals, all of the fertilizers and all of that. Is it resilient? In other words, is it able to withstand the different weathers, the different climates and all of that sort of thing? So that's a very pertinent question this year. But I think that, again, a slightly bigger question is, are the systems that we as a 300-acre farmer relying upon, are they going to be there? And should I be working my farm system towards that global system of producing anonymous grain, anonymous pigs, or whatever it might be? Is there an opportunity before it's too late to actually go to our local community, or whatever that might be, quite some, it could be 20, 30 mile kilometer, probably less than that, and put an offer out there. So actually, I'm happy to find some people with me to grow food that you would like. Would you like to buy my food? And the conversations, okay, quite early days in some sense. A lot of people are very enthusiastic about that thought, at least. There's practicalities and realities that get in the way very quickly. What food have you actually got? Well, I've got some bread, basically, or whatever. So it takes a little bit of a while to kind of click in. But that kind of conversation, that joining, that reconnecting of people who are eating the food to the people who are growing the food, if that can be as broad, as short and as direct as possible, and in our connected world, that actually is not as hard as it once was. So even in our, in the heart of Norwich, perhaps it is possible to find ways of connecting, joining together. So I think that's why it's a slight dream in one sense, because I know it's not happening at the moment on our particular place. But I do see, if you come across CSAs, so community supported agriculture, if you get a vegetable box, for instance, that's often done through that system, whereby there's a subscription that a person pays and the farmer gets that, and in return you get the box of vegetables. As it turns out, probably a similar price to the supermarket. But there's issues that you don't get the same food in February as you do in glorious June. So, it's all of that stuff. But there is an issue as well with that, I think, of price, because that does sound, at first, quite premium, and it might sound prohibitive. But again, I think, again, you see, there's so many in the price that we pay in the supermarkets and in spar shops or whatever. There's so many middle cuts being taken from the actual food that is produced. The cauliflower costs 9p to grow or something silly like that. It ends up being £1.50 in Sainsbury's or Waitrose or whatever. That's a lot of money, which is sliced off. Are there ways of getting a 9p cauliflower to a hungry family in an efficient way, a fair way, and a nutritious way? And I think there's so many wins in that story that it's untrue. But it takes imagination, and it takes stepping aside from the system, and that's not easy.
Leon, thank you very much. You'll also know that the Bishop of Norwich said that this is a year to think prophetically and to dream dreams. So it's wonderful to hear a dream being born out of what you're saying. So as you'll see, flicking onto my phone, checking our timing, we're on timing. And so now I'd just like to open up for the next 20 minutes to any questions you would like to pose to the panel, anyone in particular, or to everybody. And then after that, after about 20 minutes, I'm going to invite you into small groups around your tables for a little discussion and a breakout room on Zoom. And then we'll feed that back in. So just, Barbara's got a roving mic. I'm sure Gemma will put her hand up saying, I've got a question from Zoom. I hope so. Let's see what you have. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Barbara, you might have to be running around.
Sorry. Thanks, that was really interesting. Actually, especially coming from like a scientific background, I'm really surprised at the fact that travel costs are so low, because that is, you know, when you see a packet and it says it's come from like South Africa and you think, oh no, that, you know, I guess my question was, you talked about, and I couldn't quite see on the graph, obviously kind of like livestock and plant-based things, but I was wondering if there was much in the way of like fish and like where that kind of falls in terms of carbon footprint, and yeah, like how comparable it is to either of them.
Okay, so specifically on the fish question, fish is quite difficult to put on a chart like that because it is just an extremely broad distribution. Actually, I think in my slides there's one further back, if you can get it out, with lots of wobbly lines. While you dig that out, I'll keep talking. So fish, depending on how it's produced, can have extremely high emissions, as high as beef, if it's produced poorly. For example, if you have fish ponds that are not managed well, where you get anoxic conditions, then you've got a lot of methane bubbling up, and it's terrible from an emissions point of view. Wild caught fish tends to have quite low emissions, but has massive other impacts. You get a lot of environmental damage from fish that gets killed at sea and lost there. You get fishing nets that gets lost. That's half the plastic that's in the ocean is fishing nets. So there are other issues there, which is why it doesn't often feature in these calculations that are just based on emissions, because fish is quite difficult to fit into that. Farmed fish sometimes does get put into those, and that differs quite a lot, but can be quite bad as well for the issue I mentioned. Yes, so these wobbly lines, this shows the distribution. So all the different farms that you get, some are better, some are worse, and you can see just how wide some of those are, especially for the beef at the top, for example. Some are more efficient and produce beef with less emissions. Some are far, far worse. And again, this is for a consumer, this is extremely difficult to tell.
Thank you. Just going on to the scientific farming. There's been a lot of talk recently about using charcoal in ruminants' food and reducing the amount of methane that's produced. Can you throw any light on that?
Yes, so there are a few different additions. So charcoal is one. There a few other plant or mineral-based additions. One really interesting one is red seaweeds of Asparagopsis. And all of those are meant to reduce the amount of methane that gets produced in the rumen of the ruminant. How well that works in practice is up for debate, and especially it's quite ill-suited for the way that we farm most ruminants, which is out on pasture. So how do you get this thing that you have to add into all of their feed if they're out in the pasture eating grass? So it works really well when you're in the feedlot, but then you have to produce all that other food to them and carry it to them, which comes with other problems. So there's really interesting research going on there, and I think that can reduce emissions under laboratory conditions. It works well, but I haven't seen it work well under real life conditions anywhere yet.
I think my question is to Anna. It's amazing what you said about like the preference of what people eat, especially children, because I've got a 13-year-old and it's a nightmare to get her to eat fruits and veg. So I feel the pain. But then what's very sad is that, and she will choose burger, hot dog, really not really good diet really, but I try my best to just sneak some veg in there. But it's really hard when you said, I agree with you when you say it's what I eat, but the question is then how do you transform that mindset of this younger generation to say, no, I don't eat this. And I'm saying this because I'm originally from Africa and I grew up drinking porridge. And having been in the UK as a refugee, I remember hard times where my mom used to take that corn porridge and mixing it with custard. It was amazing and it lasted us all day, really. We'll go to school in the morning for breakfast and we come back home at 4 o'clock and we still feel full. So more recently, when I heard about nutrition, I felt really sad because I thought corn porridge with custard will be great. But again, is this something that the kids in Lackman or Market Lane would take? You know, so what's the answer?
Yeah, I think the answer is no, if I'm honest. However, I think that there is things we can do around education. I think a lot of children don't know necessarily what is healthy. And I think we can work with schools and especially from the early years. But also I think there's a lot we can do around introducing different types of food, particularly in these communities. I know a lovely example in Thetford where in the social supermarket, which social supermarkets are kind of between a food bank and a normal supermarket, it gives that kind of empowerment to choose for people. They had a big tub of free mangoes. People could take the mangoes and none went, and they didn't understand why. And so they suddenly realized that no one had a clue what they were, how to eat them. So the week after, they took the mangoes and they made them into smoothies. And as people walked into the Burrell shop, they gave them a little bit of smoothie and they're like, wow, what's this? And so then they left the mangoes and all of them disappeared. And so that was just such a lovely example of we need to introduce children to these foods, but in a way that isn't eat your veg or do this kind of thing. Just gently introduce, I think, some foods. However, mangoes are not accessible fruits, so we need to do that sensibly because, you know, obviously cost a lot of money. But I think, yeah, introducing children to the foods.
Sorry, we haven't got any smoothies today. Next time.
Yeah.
We have an online question.
So I have a question for all of the panel, perhaps. So Kirsten on Zoom is asking, is it time for a different acronym to LOAF?
Leon, you haven't answered a question yet.
So what LOAF stands for.
That's local, organic, animal friendly, fair trade.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, what I was just saying, I think the local's important. You know, local could be a big win, so I quite like local to stay. Yeah, I think the organic is potentially well-meaning, and often there are some nutritional wins and some benefits to organic, but it can be quite elitist, and actually you can properly produce good quality food which doesn't have to be stringently organic, but can be towards organic without the. Again, if it's local and you know the farmer, if you know where it's come from, you can make an assessment that actually I'm happy with how that animal is produced or how those vegetables. So yeah, I think you could drop the organic in the name, especially thinking of affordability, as long as you kind of got a sense of where it's from. So I'm
Animal friendly.
Animal friendly, yes. I think this comes down to conscience as much as it does the environment. I mean, on Sunday we had the wife bought the chicken, but it was the £4, £5 chicken, whatever. I don't feel nice about eating that chicken. I mean, it tasted okay, I suppose. You know, that doesn't sit well with me. But at the same time, we ate it though, didn't we? You know, and I suspect most of you here have had something similar. That is a harder one because that inevitably means more expensive. It inevitably means less. It inevitably means that you can't do that cheap. So that's but what you can do, I think, with the animal welfare piece is you can sell that. I would want to sell this on actually being more nutritious, actually being more flavoursome, there's something more in that meal where you know where the animals come from, that actually I mean, it might be a little bit woo-woo, it might be a little bit, you know, not just scientific, but there's a sense that if you know where an animal's come from, you know that it's had a good life, it is better for you. So I think I'd add that bit, and then and the F is the fair trade. Yeah, this has to be. This, I think this comes down to the endemic system that the food is produced under and in. And the fair trade is trying, isn't it, to be around the back of that system. It's trying to find a way of being direct, of and ensuring the growers have a fair price and all of that. Yes, I think that is possible. But again, I think the local angle of fair trade, if you it could be inbuilt into that. So actually, know your farmer, source your food that actually it will be fair trade because it's direct. It will be as organic as you want it to be. Because if you as a grower want it to be organic, it will be organic. If you're going to pay for it, you know. And what's the other one? And you get to see the animals. And you have to have a conversation with the farmer, and the farmer has to have a conversation with you. You've got to look each other in the eyes and both be happy. I would say the loaf could be, I can't think of an acronym for it, but it could just be farmer. You know, it could just be, you know, look at your local farmer, have the conversation, and you'll find perhaps some of the loaf stuff is quite negotiable and quite possible.
Look them in the eye.
Yeah.
I like that. Anna.
Yeah, I don't have much to add other than to agree with you. I do feel a bit uncomfortable about some of those words. I don't think they're accessible to the communities that I work with. I don't think people would understand what fair trade is. And I'm challenged on a kind of weekly basis where people stop me and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Just all the words and the language we use at university. So I do wonder if there is just a way. I was thinking, can we do something like providing food with love or in love, and that has so many different meanings, but I like your idea of farmer. And I do think there are accessible ways, you know, I totally agree with you about that 9p cauliflower. And with the social supermarkets, we've been looking at a model of cost plus a penny, so that we're recognising the cost to the farmer, and we're recognising the addition that needs to then be added, you know, once you scale that up. However, we're also making then a 10p cauliflower to the families that we're working with. So.
Yeah, I think these have been really wonderful answers. And what I didn't talk about, but I actually fully agree with Leon, is that having a connection to how our food is produced is really valuable. And that is something that can only happen at a local level. And far too many of us are entirely separated from how our food gets produced, because so few of us work actually in agriculture. And understanding what it means to work in this kind of dance with nature that we do when we grow food, that has been lost in from our public consciousness in a way that it hasn't been for many people elsewhere in the world, and hadn't been for generations before us. And rebuilding some of that would help a lot to get us back to understanding what impacts we have on the world when we produce food, and also to value food more and come to a better understanding of what it means to use the life of an animal, or to use a plot of land for the food that we produce. So
look the farmer in the eye with love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree. I would probably just de-emphasize the LOAF acronym. It's the organic that I have most issues with. I would want to add low emissions, and I have no idea what that does to the acronym. But we have good scientific evidence now on the emissions associated with different foods, and for the climate crisis, that's super important. There are other aspects to consider to do with equity of food and to do with local environmental impacts. That's then make this a much more complicated picture.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, Barbara.
Thank you for the panel. Yeah, thanks for the panel. That was a really helpful discussion. As I understand it, the Arosha questionnaire says we should be promoting loaf and organic and fair trade to our congregations. And from what you've been saying, and from what I'm understanding, is that's not right, because we can't be promoting these things to people who can't afford them or don't understand it. and it's not right that we should. So I come back to Kirsten's point and say, isn't it time to dump the loaf question, or at least to modify it, to take in some of the views that the panel have now expressed?
So I think that's something for the environmental working group, and hearing this, I think that's an action we can take forward. And certainly I do feedback, and we have fed back through the environmental working group, the diocese, questions back to Arusha. And I think the organic question coming out is really fascinating to push back and just ask them for a greater explanation.
Can I just add in, Arusha are currently reworking their questionnaires at the moment. So sometime in the next 6 months, a new version of bronze, silver and gold will be heading our way. We'll be given a bit of a grace period to, if we've already started a survey in our church, we'll be given a certain leeway to complete before having to start all over again with a new questionnaire. But I think I will ask, Polly Eaton is coming from Arusha to speak at a day conference we've got in June. So I will email her ahead of that and then ask her for an answer by the time she comes, to see if that is one of the things that's being changed. Because I'd be quite surprised if they haven't had that feedback, not just from us, but from other areas as well. Yeah.
So I think we've got two more questions if we're swift. One question here, and if there's another, and then we'll go, yes, there's another Zoom question after that, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms.
I just was thinking about the kind of factor that we haven't talked about too much. Anna kind of mentioned it, that quite often people's choices get based on the time that they have. I certainly have quite a full day and I'm not very good at planning ahead. I'm not very good at meal prepping, or I don't know, doing all my meals on a Sunday and freezing them. And so then it's something that I could get and cook in 15-20 minutes. And that often isn't the healthiest or the most sustainable, because that unfortunately, in the society that we live in, all of these choices are a mental load. So are there ways that we could kind of reduce that for people, particularly that are already struggling and working multiple jobs, to kind of like on that side, and then also people that are maybe in like very high powered jobs that also don't have the kind of brain power for those things?
Shall I? In terms of social supermarkets, so a number of the nutritionists that I work with, the Mediterranean diet is showing some really big impacts around cognition, particularly around 50 to 60-year-olds. And so we've been looking at how do you do that with people that can't afford. And we're looking at doing kind of bags in social supermarkets where you can do it really cheaply with a tin of chickpeas, a tin of tuna and some tomatoes. And you're meeting a number of the different, with some olive oil, very expensive, I know in that case, but you can kind of make it really easy by the family can pick up that bag and there's your kind of healthy meal. So that's what we've been looking at in social supermarkets with that. And in terms of the other end that you're saying around people that earn high earners, but maybe are reaching for some not such healthy options. I know that one of we've got an academic at the university who's very interested with Deliveroo, actually making a simple healthy foods that can just be dialed in, because at the moment they're not. You can't dial in a jacket potato with tuna, for example. Well, would it work if there was such an option? And he's really keen to kind of do some research around that.
Do you have anything to add to that? No.
Thank you. So I've got two questions I'm going to conflate. Sorry, David. From Judy on Zoom. First, she says, how would you apply these principles that we were talking about this evening to our smallest rural communities? And then she also asked if you had one key piece of advice or information you want to share, what would it be?
So let's take rural communities, all three of you, and then key piece of information.
I think Leon is probably the best place to talk about rural communities.
Yeah, okay, I've got an idea for that. Okay, yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's funny, this is the odd one. The rural communities, one should be the easiest and most obvious place to find that connection with, let's say, go down the farm route. But actually, it could be the hardest place, because they might be typically all big farms and no one's actually doing that. And actually you need to be on the outskirts of Norwich to, typically find that kind of a place. So, however, I think the farming community is pretty pragmatic and kind of solution. The average farmer is a solution finder, and and I think again a small rural community that actually found a way of making that connection could be quite pleasantly surprised at the feedback that could come back. I mean, just on potatoes and onions and carrots or something. I mean, it's just sort of some basic, relatively easy things to grow. Could be great. Yeah, I'll just leave that there for the moment.
I could say as a rector of 7 small rural parishes with a variety of farmers, I think the farmers really do appreciate being engaged with and not being seen as something very different. They are part of the community. I think we have to be extremely sensitive about how at times we do approach them, because they are also trying to make sure they are financially viable. And I sometimes get the impression that some of the farmers are a bit concerned. You feel that there's having a stone thrown at them when they're just trying to make it work. So there's that sensitivity in that too. And they are up for the conversation. We've had before Jake Fine speak, who is a conservation manager on Holcombe Estate. So that the conversation is engaging and it is coming. So let's go back to the one tip and one piece of advice. I think that was the question, wasn't it, Gemma? One key piece of information or advice to share. This time I will go to you, Peter.
Something I found very enriching in thinking about our own food choices is looking around the world what other people do, because that can give you a really good idea of what you can do with all the things that you can find in a supermarket that are affordable. For example, what can you do with lentils? Lentils can be wonderful if you know how to cook them. If you don't know how to cook them, they're very boring. If you don't have cooking facilities available, you can't eat them at all. But just having the restriction of, okay, what can I buy that's cheap, that has little emissions, and that I can find locally. If you have the time to think about it, and you have the wherewithal to cook it, that can be a really nice challenge, and can be really a lovely thing that brings you closer to the food again. To think about, okay, what meal can I make with this? What do other people make with this? And we found that very enriching, because we now have just a few recipes dotted from all over the world of what people do with these different foods. And we can buy those things relatively cheaply as well.
For me, I think I would encourage people to support their local food bank or local social supermarket. And thinking about the loaf kind of principles, I'd add an A in terms of accessibility and access to food. I think often for me, it's becoming more aware of the hunger around me and little things that I can do. When I'm doing a group, I ensure I have sufficient food. I do my group discussion around food so that it's available and, there's access to food at that point. But yeah, I just encourage you to support what's there already.
I've heard this said once somewhere, and I can't remember where it was, but the phrase was "eat low to the ground," and I think what that meant was source as much as you can, which is practical, which is doable, from places that you know. There's quite a bit of our diet, be it the vegetables, be it perhaps the meat we eat, the fruit we eat. It is findable, and it ought to be quite cheap, low to the ground, near to us, and I suspect that it does take a bit of effort, and it's a bit of an adventure, and it's a bit of a challenge, but yeah, worth doing.
A bit more rootling around.
Yeah, brutally, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're now going to go into breakout groups for about 10 minutes, just to have a discussion, see what you've come up in your speaking to each other about, what you've seen is important, other issues, raising other issues to the fore before we bring it back in this subject. That would be fantastic. So if we do a breakout group on Zoom, I think it'd be quite nice if you turned our speakers off. Mute us for a moment, that we'd like that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, very.
Didn't really get and you've got some deep shot.
I mean, I've not really.
That is now changing the tune. I don't know how you found it out.
That's a section.
Yeah, no, it was. Oh, maybe you said something about.
Okay, so, do you want to sort of take a group? We know we've got some exciting things in. Should we get what's online? What online would they like to feed back in?
They're just coming back into the room at the moment. They're not quite in the room with us yet.
Are they in the room?
Not in the room where it happens.
Well, it seems you ought to slightly wait until they're in the room. I think that would only be fair. You get the full experience.
Calling them all back.
Have you lost them?
Just shut them.
Okay.
The countdown. Twenty seconds to go.
Okay, we're in.
We're in. Hello, welcome back, those online. We were waiting for you. We have not started. We're too excited. So why don't you sort of get into your Zoom positions? We'll go with just in front of me here. Is there anything you would like to feedback in this table?
This table
Yeah.
here. Listen.
I think I'm just gonna touch on we talked about farmers, didn't we? And I recently had a conversation about reaching out to farmers. And I'm glad you spoke today because I feel like what I got in today is that there is two types of farmers. So there is a kind of industrial farmers, but there is also kind of like low-key farmers, I think, which you mentioned that are approachable. But then and then what came out of the discussion is that how do we approach them? Where do we find them? Because I didn't know that they existed. And when I had that conversation about reaching out to farmers and I was told, no, it's only for industrial, I was left broken because I thought there might be a way of reaching out to farmers. But another thing we talked about, and I think I'll pass to you, which was a very strong comment about the system, the economic system. And you want to say the way you said it because it's
Oh, I can't remember what I said. I was both inspired and puzzled and want to explore what Leon was saying, that we want to have these more local systems. You've got a vision of these systems, but it's not the system we've got. And as an economist, I'm very aware of power in systems, and that's partly what goes around the middlemen, I guess. But also I puzzle about how we can we don't necessarily, I don't sure we necessarily need to break out of the system we've got, but how we can supplement it with another system. And of course, all experts, well, if I'm an expert or academics will say, oh, that's not my area, and it isn't my area. But it seems to me a conundrum that's really interesting to try and explore. I also it's all here on this table, a lot of discussion about how middle class the discussion generally is around this, but actually I want to access that middle classness because I want to go back with some advice for the people in St. Peter Mancroft and how they can contribute. So that's another aspect. But anyway, so anyone who has an idea of developing new economic systems, sounds really good.
I think we're just sort of gathering thoughts on it rather than bring it into a discussion in terms of our time. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to go into exploring. I mean, I would absolutely love to, but our time is going to be a bit confined.
Great question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another quick point that I've come across, which is important. They never used to be debt on the food. And I think this is what is leading to high level of wasting food products, because if the debt has gone, you know, and just checked whether the food could also be eaten at the time. So how can we work around these dates and buy?
The date on the food is very relevant, including the food that you've been offered this evening. Which is all food waste, and Gemma's going to speak about that a little bit, and there's going to be some more information, so I hope we can gather this stuff up. There are going to be more questions and answers as we explore this. So next take, please.
Regarding your comment about farming, I think part of the problem is actually trying to get people into farming because of the cost of the price of land. And particularly young people, it's extremely difficult. And maybe it's something that the church can actually help with Glebland, and maybe setting up CSAs for younger people to then work within a community. That might be a possibility.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thought. Glebland is part of the eco-diocese, looking at what Glebland is. Glebland itself, I would say we have spoken to some of the Glebe committee. It is very complex. It's tied up in long leases. So it's not a quick fix. It's a much longer journey with Glebland when you look at those contracts.
We also talked as well about education around actually cooking food. And I'm a passionate cook, and alongside my collar, I also cook for a living. And it's more and more difficult to actually find ingredients in supermarkets to actually cook with, because nearly everything you see in the supermarket has already been pre-packaged or marinated or done whatever with. And then that leads on for me, which is another thing about plastic. You know, it's very difficult to buy like a bag of lentils that's not wrapped in plastic. So purchasing food to cook with is becoming a problem. We're in a rural group of churches, so we have the one co-op. You know, we don't have little farm shops or greengrocers. The sort of rural idea that we have these, you know, we used to go and pick sweet corn or pick strawberries. It's long gone. So there's a thing about actually showing people how to cook with ingredients, but it's also accessing them as well.
Thank you. Absolutely. Rural poverty is very real, and we forget about it often. Should we go to that table? We'll do Zoom and then you.
We wondered how you changed the culture of meat eating, because many people, when we try and offer them vegetarian food, say no, thank you. We also mused about the high cost of some vegetarian foods, which are highly processed. So if you want to say to someone, oh, you don't have to have a beef burger, you can have a veggie burger. Veggie burgers can be more expensive than beef burgers. Another dilemma.
Before we go to the enacronym table, we'll come to that in a second, because we've had a loaf challenge coming here from my left. Do we want to have a little bit of the Zoom feed in?
So, so I asked the group on Zoom what they'd like to feedback, and they said they've been having a discussion about food in schools. Quite often there's difficulty in schools with quality and choice of food. So a lot of the time food isn't of high quality. Also, the group were talking about how they're starting to have these conversations in the smaller rural churches. And Judy said it started with after church refreshments. So just a really small change could start to kind of change that culture. And we've had a little bit of discussion on fair trade. So people would like to explore fair trade. And Kate and John have suggested that we might want to have some discussions with some young farmers groups on some of this too.
Young focus groups, that's excellent.
Young
farmers, we
Yeah.
could, yeah, if there's more, the opportunity, I think the Eco Forum is just beginning, it feels.
And
Um,
on that young farmers idea, or what you were talking about, getting younger people into farming, that's partly why Bishop Graham started up his Young Environmental Sustainability Apprenticeship of the Year. So he's got this that he gives out, I think it's £1,000 actually, but more it's to do with the fact that it's giving them recognition. So he does that with the Royal Norfolk Agricultural Association once a year to specifically for 16 to 22-year-olds. So anybody can apply. I think the deadline's next week. So if you know of a young person in the air, yeah, put them in touch.
this last but not least.
You need to share your acronym.
Yeah, well, just before that, I guess one of the things that we talked about, kind of along the idea of like meal packs and kind of giving recipes so that people, you know, understand how to cook lentils and stuff. But also the kind of the comment about the chicken and like eating the chicken and it not sitting right, if you kind of know that's not, then ultimately I suppose the only way to do it cheaply is to do just plant-based. Like if you did the same meal but did it without chicken, I suppose like, yeah, that kind of maybe when you have kind of communal meals, them all being plant-based, there is the issue that was raised about some people kind of having a negative connotation with it being veggie, but yeah, and then the suggested acronym, I guess it could be LEAF or like LEAF with 2 L's, because it would be local, low emission, or just local emission, accessible and fair, because I think fair would probably cover animal fairness and fair trade. So, and then, you know, vaguely green.
Yeah, and I was also just sharing a bit about what had worked well throughout the pandemic was connecting with schools as well, and we were able to send out like recipe packs, and like we had rhubarb and things like that, and families wouldn't necessarily know how to use it. So I think connecting with schools and what's already going on and supporting what's happening is really helpful as well.
Brilliant. Is there anything else you'd like to, these wonderful panelists? Okay, so I just get to hand over to Gemma now, just to briefly speak about food waste.
So all of the food that you have eaten this evening, and quite a lot that you haven't eaten, so we'd love you to take away with you, has come from food waste. So it is all surplus food that has come from kind of local organisations. So the pastries, a lot of the cakes came off a food sharing app called Olio. Hands up if you've heard or used Olio before. So Olio is an app that you can download and it knows where you are, and it will tell you of food that's available that you can go and collect, and you can go and do that, and it's entirely free. You're not allowed to charge or use it. So all of the pastries and things came off Olio as well. You can also request things, and it's also very good for non-food items as well. The other ones, so all the cakes and the bread came from an app called Too Good To Go. Any Too Good To Go fans here? We have a Yo Sushi in our local Tesco's, and they quite frequently pop up on Too Good To Go, as well as the local Toby Carvery. So there is all sorts that you can get on there, and that's not free, but it is quite heavily discounted, and it's all food that has come from restaurants or supermarkets or other shops. So really, really good. Both of those are apps that you can download, and a really good way of reducing food waste.
Gemma, thank you very much. Well, I'm left with the great privilege of saying thank you to all As I said at the beginning, this is our first in-person meeting. It's the first time Gemma and I have actually met. And she's been wonderful on the EK Church Forum, and she actually is now leading the way to go heading south, looking south. So thank you for all you've given, Gemma. Will you pass on our thanks to Hannah, who's looking after Natty and Joel, Peter, for what she's done in setting this up, and Barbara, we're ever grateful to your work. There is a technician at the back who has been brilliant this evening. Dave, thank you very, very much. And also Paul, who was here earlier, we're really grateful. And again, as I said at the beginning, we're very grateful to the entire PCC, the incumbent, and all who make up St. Stephen's team for hosting us. Thank you too for all of you coming. However, there is another thank you, obviously, and it's just finding its way. Leon, you've been utterly inspirational. It's been a delight to have you. Anna, you have opened our eyes, and we are so grateful. And Peter, I have to say the statistics are absolutely fascinating. You brought a brand new dimension into this, and the three of you complementing all of it together. I wish you'd all been here and had the little discussion we had while you were doing your breakout. I had to rip myself away just to check us on time. But truly, the three of you, we are extremely grateful. So thank you very much indeed for making time on this Tuesday night for joining us. So. Now, if I could hand over to Barbara for a prayer, and then I invite us all, we'll say thank you to the people on Zoom as well for joining. After we've all said amen, we'll sign you out. You can go and have a lovely evening at home. We, on our hand, will go and get the food.
Okay, let's pray. Father God, Creator God, we thank you for all that has been discussed this evening. And I pray that as we go from this place, these thoughts will continue to just brew in us, and the conversations will continue in the areas where we dwell. And that we will take wisdom and learn from it and grow with it. Creator God, we acknowledge that as your handiwork, we stand alongside all that you have made. Trees and rivers, mountains and valleys, soaring birds and scuttling creatures, all are held within your care. May we grow in our love and appreciation for the fabulous variety around us. And may our awe and wonder draw us closer to the natural world, and through it to you, the God of all things. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much.
Good.